Big Joe Motorol, pedaling all the way from Ottawa on just one day. Hey, hey, on the river Ottawa, the best man ever. Come up, the old folks say. Come and listen and tell you what the old folks say. They say Big Joe drank a bucket of gin and he beat the living tar out of 29 men. And high on the ceiling of a Pembroke pub is 29 boot marks and they're signed with love. There's daylight. I can see the wheels. Where spiders go to die. Hark! You can see the front logo. First time in years. I don't know how much more I can handle though. This is like going for a raise. Since the tits and bobs of steel are right here, why not fabric cobble together a purpose-built steel rack? How can I work like this? I quit better jobs than this. It's like an East Indian shipbreaking yard threw up in here. We're gonna cut the end off this. What for making it not like an apprentice went at it with a dull beaver. Square up the stock, Now this is using what you got. That's 35.5 inch. So that's we got a half that. So that's 15 and plus 2 3/4. That's 17 3/4. Let's measure once, cut twice. No, maybe 3 times. Metric fanboys be like, what? And pop the breaker. One thing to be said though, the chop saw, despite its red countenance, she's torquey. Fucking steel. I mean, come on. Chewing through scabby old steel in seconds. Noises and sparks, and what's the point of having the cock and balls of a bull moose if you can't swing them around? You know, sometimes you get so wrapped up in the day-to-day. Oh, this the sale at Costco, this, that, the other thing. Fuck me, when you actually make something, feels good. Just making the cross member is going to be about 18 inches. I cut her long. What for fixing the apprentice marks here. Again, with the salty beaver. Mighty fine weather this time of year. Rain. Cold as a gold digger's heart with that gleam in her eye. So I prefer to do my welding outside, but today it's just not conducive to outside welding. Now in my humble opinion, welding is a fantastical skill to have on account of taking mild steel, being able to take any kind of mild steel, using angry pixies out of the wall, melting that steel and gluing them together. I mean, it's friggin' amazing, and that's well within the range of any kind of homeowner, any kind of, if you got arms, if you got nubs, you can weld. I may not have touched on this explicitly. I prefer to do that in the privacy of my own home, but I harness the power of the learning curve to get up to speed on stuff quick, but maybe not master it. And welding is one of those skills that you can get up to speed on quick, even though you don't master it. You don't really need to spend 4 years in the field in order to sort of bubblegum something together, you know, with some chicken shit hemorrhoids on there. But the more time you spend learning about it, and actually the best thing to do is to take a course, because there's certain things that you just cannot learn from a book or even from a video on the internet. There's a feel to it, and when you take a proper course with a guy, he's gonna get you to hold his hand while you strike an arc. He's gonna get you to feel sort of how his arm is moving and where to sling the cord and all these sort of tricks that you're not gonna get. So if you're into welding, the best thing you can do is go and take a stick welding course. Forget about the MIG. Fuck MIG. It's too easy. There's the one that all sorts of goofballs, they pick up a machine, they spend 15 minutes welding and, hey, I'm a welder. Now, stick welding is good and cheap because you don't need any of this ancillary equipment. You don't need bottles of pressurized gas in your house. You don't need to fill those bottles. You don't need all the, it's just way easier because your only consumable are these little sticks, and they come with their own inert atmosphere. They have a flux on them, and that flux is essentially, it's like limestone and some metal particles and cellulose from trees, and that burns. When that burns, that creates an inert atmosphere for the arc to travel through, and the arc is so hot that it melts the steel and it also melts the base metal. You get way better penny. It's all about the good penetration, am I right? You get way better penetration with this, so you can use it for much, much thicker materials. It's just more versatile because you can do it outside, and because it's got a flux on the outside as opposed to MIG, you can use scabby metal. And the flux will pick up all that scabbiness. Say there's paint on there. You can even weld through the paint. As long as you can strike an arc, that flux will burn off all the paint. Try doing that with MIG, my friend. It's not going to work. You're going to get a horrendous job. Now, having said that, welding is just like painting, just like drywalling, it's all in the prep. The results you get all depend on how much prep you put in. Now, you have to sort of balance that out. Are you just looking to weld up a fence post or something real quick on the back 40, some scabby piece of gear that only has to last the day? Well, then you don't have to spend much time prepping it. But if you want something that's going to last forever and look decent, you're going to need to prep. Now, these welding rods come in different lengths, different thicknesses, different constituents in the flux, and different constituents what for change in the properties of the metal. So this is a very common rod. It's called 70-18. 70 is 70,000 pounds per square inch tensile strength. 1 is the positions, so that means all position, and the 8 is the type of flux. Now, that is an American Welding, AWS, American Welding Society designation. Not all rods that you buy are going to have that designation because not everybody's in the States. And also, if they use that designation, they need the manufacturer, like these guys, who are these Air Liquide, they need to pay they need to license that number from the AWS. It costs them money. So you'll see a lot of times, like on the ESAB welding electrodes, there won't be any designation. And also, because we're in North America, these are 1/8 rods, so that's 3.2 millimeters, 350 millimeters long. 1/8, it's actually, this is super useful because you don't know how many angry pixies to put in there. What kind of ampacity do you need? Well, the rule of thumb, a good start, is to take the diameter in thousandths of inches of the rod. There we go, 125. We're going to use 125 amps, and that's going to get us close. Okay, we're going to flash up the little suitcase welder. It's a step above those crappy Tombstone ones that are just AC. It is a DC machine. You want to have DC because it makes for nicer welds, and you can use the nicer welding rods. There's only 2 welding rods you're going to use. Essentially 80-18, 70-18. Those are, well, grouped into the same because there's that 18 nomenclature. So either 70,000 pounds per square inch tensile strength or 80,000 pounds per square inch tensile strength. And 60-10. Now 60-10 is very special. It freezes fast, so it kind of is ugly. This freezes a little slower, so it smooths out your ugly edges. There's also what they call jet rod, which is 70-14 or 70-16, something like that. And jet rod freezes really slowly, so it looks beautiful, but it is very susceptible to having scabbiness on, you got to prep better. So this 70-18 is a very nice rod to learn with because it's a good balance of, you don't really need to prep that well. Now the 60-10, your welds are going to be ugly. They're just straight up going to be ugly. at the best of times because it freezes really quickly. The advantage is you can have super scabby material. If there's any water, say you're in a puddle and you're welding, if there's any water, that water dissociates, it's going to turn into hydrogen and oxygen. The hydrogen is very, very soluble in liquid steel, in molten steel. It's very soluble. The problem is when that weld solidifies, it turns from liquid to solid, it's hypereutectic. So the hydrogen comes out of solution and makes tiny little bubbles in there. It's called hydrogen embrittlement. And that's one of the things that makes welds, especially field welds, break quite easily, is having water around or hydrocarbons, because it puts hydrogen into the molten steel, and then when it solidifies, hydrogen comes out of solution, makes these little hydrogen gas pockets, makes cracks in your weld. So this 60-10, the long, the short, and the curly of it is, this 60-10 is good for scabby welds. So if you get paint or whatever on there, you want to use 60-10. Even though it's uglier, it's going to be stronger than a jet rod or a 70-18. If you're able to stick weld, now all of a sudden it opens up a whole world that you can't do with just MIG, because you can hard face. You can do high nickel welding for engine blocks. You can do hard facing for wear items. You could hard face a knife, you know, to make some sort of Damascus, essentially. There's all sorts of different rods for all sorts of different applications, and you can't get that in a wire spool that feeds on a MIG gun. You just can't do it. So I'm telling you, if you're going to learn, go cheap, get a stick machine. Because learning curve, when you first start off welding, you're down here, and then all of a sudden it starts to take off and you learn lots, and then it takes 40 years to get to here. So if you start MIG welding, you're going to be, and you're decent at it, you're going to be about here on the welding scale. Just starting to sort of learn. Then when you want to pick up something like TIG welding, you got this whole fucking slope. You're not going to figure out, because, or it's going to take way more work to figure out, because it's far harder and you're not used to arc length and angle and all sorts of setting the machine. You know, a lot of the machines now, the MIG machines, even have preset. You don't, yeah, it's too easy. So if you stick weld though, you're going to have to climb up this sort of to here before you even get sort of decent at it. But when you're first learning something, you put the effort in. Now all of a sudden, TIG is no big deal, and MIG, you'll pick up a MIG and you'll be like, holy shit, this is so fucking easy. And you'll be doing way nicer welds than the guys who started off on MIG right off the bat. Okay, so PPE for this now. Summer's over, so you can see I'm working on my Cave Troll 10 here. This outputs lots of UV. It's very powerful. And you will get a sunburn from this. Also, you can get a sunburn on your eyeballs, which is no fucking fun at all. It's like having sand in your eyes for days on end. So PPE. I like a beanie, because you get a burn on your scalp from spatter, and it happens all the time. And there's no hair that's going to grow there anymore. So, you know, got to be cognizant of that. I'm a vain and petty man. And then your pipeliner here, welding helmet, just get an old cheapo at first, and then if you want to spend a couple $100, get a proper, you know, a real nice one for TIG welding. Stickers are optional, of course, but most places want you to have at least 11 pieces of flare, because you will get burned doing this. There's molten metal spattering everywhere. You get the little tiny roach burns on your arms, also on your head sometimes, down your back. Yeah, it happens. It hurts just for a couple seconds and then you're okay. But you know, you will get used to it. It's sort of like getting stung, I guess. Not quite as bad, but just be prepared for that. Okay, we got the little welder that could flashed up. Here's a stinger. There's also a different type, a clamp type. I prefer the Bernard stinger because you thread it in. Metal is very flexible. If you have springs in your cars, you know how much that flexes. So this steel, very flexible. Now you take a molten piece of steel, and when it cools, it has to contract. So if you have something like this that's long and you weld the bottom of it, it's going to pull that direction. So you have to be cognizant of that. And the way we mitigate it is, one, we can pull it back this way and then weld one side and it'll pull. Or the best way to do it is to tack both sides. So we do all sorts of tacking essentially. Before we even weld, we tack everything together. Then we check to make sure we're square, and then we actually start laying beads down. Now we don't assume, even though this was cut on a nice saw, we don't assume that it's square, because, like for instance, if you're cutting with a bandsaw, there's a set to the teeth, and if a couple of teeth are broken off, it pulls. Maybe they're broken off the same size of the set. You know, one tooth goes to one side of the blade, one tooth goes to the other side of the blade. There's a set and a rake and a gullet, all sorts of nomenclature there. But essentially, if you have a broken tooth or two, that blade is not going to run square. It's going to wander off to one side. So after we make our cuts, when we're tacking, we're just assembling, we always check the square with a square, and we get it set up, square. So that's good there. I'm happy with that. Now before we start tacking, we take a scabby old piece here and just get our sea legs back. Oh, also, got to look around for flammables. You get all the flammables out of here. That's critical. You don't want any rags or anything on the ground, nothing. Shields down. Okay, you will notice two things. I use my other hand. I'm wearing TIG welding gloves, not the big, thick stick welding gloves. You can't feel fuck all. I find you can't feel anything, and if you're getting that hot anyway, you're doing something wrong. So I just use the TIG welding gloves because I have better dexterity. Also, one of the things you will find watching people who are autodidacts, that is to say that they learned welding themselves or taught themselves, they will get their face right into the weld. You don't need, that's a terrible habit. You're eating smoke. I hate to tell you, there are no old welders. They very seldom live to a ripe old age. I don't want to say why, but I think we can all figure it out. So keep your face out of the smoke. There's no need to get right in there. You can see what you're doing from an arm's length away. I got a wee chip and hammer here. Comes right off. Good penetration, no undercut. Looks like the settings are perfect. Happy, happy. Now, after you've run a bead with this welding rod, you're going to see on the end there's melted flux. So you got to bust that flux off. Otherwise you won't be able to strike an arc. Now striking the arc is the hardest part. Okay, shields down. We're just going to tack this. We'll tack it on the end. Okay, so that tweaked off a little bit. Or rather, it was tweaked and I didn't catch it. So this is tweaked sidewards a little bit. So we're just going to go. And because we have tacks, we can just hit that with a hammer and move the steel where we need to. So we got this one tacked. We'll get the next piece up and tacked. The next piece, we'll get the whole thing tacked. We'll see how it looks. I'll have a good gander at it. If we're happy, then we go ahead and blast her right full of weld. Now another little tip, just to tip mind and only for a second, is that you can move this around any which way you want so that you don't have to have this straight in the stinger. You know, if you're on a weird hangulation, you just give her a bend, you know, like that BMX accident you had when you were a kid. No big deal. It still gets the job done. trick, because you can't do this now on structural stuff, but hey, if you're watching this, you're not welding structural stuff anyway, so who gives a fuck? Once I strike the arc, I can move that around anywhere. I don't need to lay a bead of weld, so I can strike over here and then go whoop to where I need to be. Now, what that does is that creates an arc strike, and it actually changes the grain structure of the material, and that's a good spot for a crack to start. So any structural welding, they're not allowed to do that, but you and I in the home shop, we can do that all day. Wherever you want to strike the arc and just pull it to where you need to be, you're golden. Say for instance this was scabby, right full of paint and crap, and you couldn't strike an arc because you couldn't break through the paint, you know, say it was epoxy real thick, and you found a spot over here that was bare metal, you could strike the arc there and just bring it right across the paint. Now that's a particularly nasty arc strike there. Let's get in the light, yeah. So that's why you don't just arc anywhere and then bring it to where you need it on structural. But for our purposes, it ain't gonna do nothing. Especially once we get a nice thick glob of paint on there. It's like it's not even there. You hear that? That's taking fine. That's what you want. If you get too far away, you'll hear that. That's what you don't want. The arc extinguishes itself. It was fighting there for a while. Oh, that's getting better. Still not great though. Started off nice and then sped up. You can see slow, like right speed, sped up a little bit, slowed down, sped up. You can see that because of course there's less material there, so I had to have gone faster. And these are just the little peen marks from whacking off. Here's the third weld. We'll see if I'm hitting my stride. You don't always need to spend a whole whack of time a-courting the prettiest belle at the ball when you're going to roll over to the Hutterite place, the farm over next, and buck yourself off around in the woodshed. So what I'm driving at here is, don't get disheartened by pictures on Instagram or welding forums of perfect welds. Those are probably guys that are pros, maybe got that bead of weld perfect in a week's worth of work and they took a snapshot. This was old scabby scrap, of course, so we got some prep to do, got to get rid of all that stuff. And also, we're going to paint this, so we need to break all the sharp edges, because the sharp edge is essentially a knife edge where the paint doesn't adhere. It pulls over that knife edge, so you need to break all these edges. For that, well, for this, we're going to use the zip cut, and then we're going to come in behind with a flap wheel. The three types of wheel you're commonly going to use grinding. It's just a straight grinding wheel. This is for removing lots of material as quick as you can. Leaves a nasty finish. A flap wheel. This removes a lot of material, but it is expensive. Essentially, all it is emery cloth flapped up. But it can leave, if you're running the machine properly, can leave a beautiful sanded finish. So we're going to use this for finishing. Oopsie. Then we got the zip cut, nice and thin. What for cutting everything under the sun. These are beautiful as long as they don't blow up and kill you. You got to watch this. When you're using a grinder, that's the thing. With guard, without, whatever. You got to stay out of the line of fire. For Jesus sakes, if it's spinning thuswards, you want to be off to the side, so that if it does blow up, it doesn't get you right in the jugular. You know, these things are spinning a thing at 11,000 ripums. When they come apart, boy howdy, you want to talk about a jagged gash. Here's a typical surface finish you get with a quick pass. One of these grinding wheels. And you can see there's hot spots in there as well. Well, not the best, but that's the kind of finish you'll see painted a lot of times. And then if you actually take care, you know, give her a heavy pass and then a light pass, you can get something reasonable. Here's the flap wheel. That's a quick pass, quite a bit nicer. Then if you take care and you go with the proper hangulation, that flap wheel, I mean, it's 4 times the price, but it's worth it.
because you can almost get it to look like a fly cutter on a milling machine.
Now that, right there, is the darn diddly darlingest steel rack west of Winterpeg. Thanks for watching. Keep your stinger in the stringer.